So good evening, everybody. My name is Annie Blair, and I'm the project manager for Boston Parks and Recreation. And we're looking forward to this second community outreach meeting tonight. We're being joined by Rob Adams and Jonathan Cave from our design consultants, Halverson, Ty and Bond, Christine Brandeo from our communications department is here with us. She's the outreach coordinator for the project. And we had a great first meeting with a lot of participation and a lot of good ideas and desires that were expressed. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is to look at some alternatives for approaching improvements to the park and playground. And I should stress that we are very grateful for your participation and your time and insights. You know, we can bring our professional expertise to the project, but the park users really know the place in a way that we can't. The Rob has a lot of experience. He was a long time South End resident and worked on the park's renovation the last time around. So we're lucky to have his history with the neighborhood and with the park, and are grateful for his involvement. So I'm going to turn it over to Rob. He's going to have some backup if needed from Jonathan, and we'll get going.
Great, thanks, Annie. There'll be a little bit of housekeeping here at the beginning. Page down. Sorry. I don't know if you want to cover this, Christine, or I can run through it. I think, as mentioned at the onset, the meeting's being recorded. I think everyone shows a consent. Hopefully we all know, or unfortunately we all know Zoom tips now, but don't hesitate to raise your hand. And there's a small group of us tonight, so I think we can just chime in, and Christine can monitor the hand raises or the chat, and maybe we'll just open it up, Christine, since there's so few people. As Annie mentioned, we had our first meeting back in July. Some really good feedback. Tonight is, sorry, first meeting back in May. There's some really good feedback. As I like to label them, there's the listening, there's which was meeting 1, meeting 2 is the sharing, and then hopefully meeting 3 is the celebration, where we all kind of congratulate one another and kind of unveil at least the aspirational direction for the improvements, and that'll be in September. And then we'll spend, next year essentially getting the documents ready, and then hopefully spring of 2022 we'll start construction. So tonight we're gonna review some of the feedbacks we got from last week, talk about some of that feedback and some of the existing conditions, and then we've kind of divided the presentation up into kind of baseline improvements, a little bit of what we heard from you all. And then the kind of meat of the conversation tonight, I think, will be about this concept alternative. So we've highlighted some more design-centric opportunities, I think, within the park. And we'll talk a little bit about play equipment. And then there was a lot of discussion, I think, in May about storytelling. And I think that's an interesting part that we'll talk about as well tonight. So in all projects, both our own private projects, but projects with the city of Boston and with other municipalities, right, there's always a lot of different factors, and we're trying to weigh the pros and cons of everyone's input to create, the sweet spot of a balanced approach, a balanced solution, which considers a lot of different inputs, a lot of different realities, maintenance, budget, and then input from the community, safety and regulations, obviously. So what did we hear? There's 10 things here. We heard a lot more than 10. We've boiled it down to 10, the kind of more key points that we heard last I'm gonna say last week, for some reason that stuck in my head, but last meeting. So just run through these real quick. And I'm sure we may have missed some things, or if you weren't at the first meeting, please don't hesitate to add more to the feedback. So one was the concern around the access to West Newton and the heavily trafficked conditions there, and whether there's an opportunity to make that feel more safe for the children, so that the parents have a little less concern around, kids bolting out into West Newton. Number two and number three, a little bit more and four, a little bit more utilitarian. Two is, the lighting is quite old on the tennis and basketball courts, and so there's a lot of glare. The timers don't necessarily work, so some improvements around the lighting. Number three is the lawn, as we all know, is highly compacted, has some really poor drainage, some poor health of the lawn stand. So that's some concerns. Four is also the accessibility, ADA accessibility to the tennis court, the basketball court, as well as the stage down there at the bottom of the center lawn. So five, there was some concerns raised, and it was a good dialogue, I think, that we had last week, and I think it came out to a good place around safety and security, and this idea, rather than gating, putting up cameras every 10 feet, just making sure that the park felt open and inviting, and so making sure that vegetation was cut back. There was open and clear views from the sidewalks into the park, as well as from the park out to the abutting streets. Number six was improvements to the playground. It's dated, the sand pit is problematic, the surface is pretty torn up. So thinking comprehensively about the playground and what opportunities are there. Seven, there was some requests for diversity of seating, more than just the granite blocks or the wooden benches. Eight, the realization that West Newton Community Garden is pretty underutilized. It gets a lot of shade. A lot of the plots are pretty fallow. And so is it the highest and best use for this park? Nine is, I think these last two are kind of more holistic, but I think nine was, there was a general sentiment by the community and frankly by ourselves that the park really functions really well. There's a lot of good programming elements. They're balanced. The circulation is laid out in a positive way. And so I don't think anyone was interested in wholesale. I know no one was interested in a wholesale change of the park, but how can we improve it? How can we modernize it in a good way, not in a overly contemporary way, but not lose the spirit of Titus Sparrow that we know and love. And then lastly, the historic wall on West Rutland side. It has some historic reference. People generally like it, but also provides a visual barrier. And so is there opportunities for making more porosity, let's call it, through the wall. So, and then just, you'll have access to this slideshow, but just some quick snapshots of some of the existing conditions, highlighting a lot of the discussion points from last week. So we've divided, as I said, we've divided the park up into the presentation, or the design, at least for now, up into two components. One is this baseline stuff that is clear cut, needs to happen, and then some more aspirational based improvements that you'll see next. And I think, it's a really dynamic time right now in the construction industry. We obviously are going to be pricing and providing a good, strong cost estimate for this work. But given the climate, it's hard to say exactly where our budgets will fall. And so I'll use the word aspirational for the second half of the kind of design components. I think have every intent of realizing most, if not all of them. But we also, as the process moves on, right, I think part of tonight might be prioritizing some of the more aspirational components in this next section. So again, our intent, and I think the park's intent, is to realize most of these improvements, but the more priority, the more weight we can give to some of the ideas, I think that'll help us down the road as budget. The reality of the kind of construction climate as it is now will help us guide the design as we move forward. So baseline improvements, right? What are we going to do regardless? So obviously replace the athletic lighting at the tennis and the basketball courts, full cutoff LED fixtures with new timers to reduce the glare, have it run on a more consistent manner. I think overall just improve the light quality and reduce any sort of light pollution or light spill associated with those. And obviously replace there's some pedestrian scale fixtures in there that are pretty beat up, some acorns that are actually within the park that we're looking to improve. Also, while we're there, resurface both athletic courts, so 5, giving it a new surface for both the tennis and the basketball court. The second item that's most likely a baseline improvement is improving the lawn. So most likely hogging up all the soil, putting in a new under drain system, new irrigation system, and putting down a more structurally based sand soil. So we recently, it's not recently anymore, completed the hatch shell lawn improvements. It's held up relatively well. We're pretty happy with that. We've learned some things with that project as well. And so applying those principles that we used at the hatch shell lawn to this location as well, basically better drainage and stronger soil conditions. Obviously update the water fountain to new City of Boston standards. I said, sorry, 5 was athletic courts. 4, replace some of the existing park benches that are in bad shape. And then obviously you'll see in the next section, look for some additional seating. 6 is repair any of the walking surfaces that are not ADA compliant, that are worn. There's a lot of the concrete that's heaved. So removing all of the, I'll say, non-compliant or poor quality paving material and replacing that. And then 7, doing an overall assessment of the vegetation, both from, as we talked about, clear sight lines, but also frankly from a successional planting point of view. Some of the lindens are quite old, they're urban trees. And so getting an arborist out to start to assess the health and the salvageability or long-term existence of these trees, and start a successional planting, tree planting program, so that when those trees pass, we're not left with a bare spot, but we have a plan for how to reestablish the trees going down long-term. So that was kind of the baseline, right? Those are all the things we're going to do. So this middle part, we're going to talk about, we'll call them advanced design opportunities, program, places in which we can think, I'll use the word aspirational a lot tonight, probably think a little bit more aspirationally, right? So the playground we know needs to be essentially redone almost in its entirety. The West Newton Community Gardens, a little bit in question. The 2 lawn panels, the east and west triangles, is shown at number 1 here, always a little bit underutilized, but I think myself as well as others in the community like a little bit of the quietness that those things bring. The lawn is active, the play space is active. Those 2 east and west quadrants provide a little bit of modular opportunities, right? We can build on the lawn, we can build on the play space. They don't want to be too programmed. And so we'll look at those a little bit. And then obviously the wall and the opportunities that the wall provides. So we'll look at 3 options, 3 concepts. All of them keep essentially the top half of the park almost intact, just making it better, doing those baseline improvements we talked about. These 3 concepts really look at this lower half, except for the ADA circulation to the sports. So quickly, the first concept, looking at providing ADA accessibility to the tennis court off of Southwest Corridor, to the basketball court there at the existing steps, and then providing accessibility along the wall down to the stage. That's kind of the baseline of most of these. Looking at revisions around the historic wall. And then you'll see in this option, providing, reimagining that entire quadrant for the play space, and then using those east and west triangles to provide additional kind of modular, as I said, a little bit more adventure play, nature-based play on the right. And then there was a request for adult fitness equipment, which I did mention, sorry, in the earlier, what we heard, the idea that there's exercise or play, quote unquote play, for all ages within the park. And so just in a planned manner, what might that look like? This more or less, this concept keeps the playground as it is in many ways. It still has the quadrants or the kind of segments or segregation of the 5 to 12, the 0 to 5, and then the swings and maybe some spinners, very similar to what's in the park. But we've looked at the space a little bit more holistically and introduce this, we'll call it a serpentine wall that defines the edge there at that northern corner. And that serpentine wall does a couple of things, right? It provides more of a physical barrier for the kids within the play space. So getting out to West Newton is more problematic. Provides a kind of diversity of seating elements, a long continuous seat wall. It also allows parents to sit more at that apex, which gives parents and care providers a more kind of 180, 360 view of the park and their loved ones. It also provides an opportunity for an artistic or narrative or storytelling element. And you can see in the image in the bottom left, this idea of a mosaic wall. Ignore the Space Needle, ignore the giant blue playground, but the idea really this kind of artistic mosaic wall in the foreground that could be an additional seating element that tries to tie the playground together, but also is a little bit of a mimic to the stage and the seat wall that's at the lawn. And then you'll notice using that western quadrant to provide a few additional adult equipment, fitness pieces, and then the eastern triangle to provide a little bit of adventure playscape elements, such as those logs that you see just as an idea on that bottom right image. The next concept is essentially the same in the areas that it touches, but we leave the western quadrant along West Newton essentially alone, and we tuck in the adult fitness equipment up closer to the West Newton area, further away from the play space. And this one thinks of the playground a little bit more thematically, and we'll talk a little bit about types of play equipment in the next round. But as you can see, it's essentially taking over the entire bottom triangle of the park. We've eliminated the West Newton community gardens and really expanded the play space to take up that entire area. The subdivision of ages would happen kind of naturally by their placement, but it all reads as one large play space, maybe more colorful rubber surfacing like you see on the left, introducing a small seating area, again, at that corner where parents have a better 180, 360 view of the park and can watch the entrances and exits to the park. And then you can see the small area of adult fitness tucked into that corner up along West Newton. And we do need a level area for the adult fitness, so we can't just scatter it willy-nilly on the hill, but we need a relatively flat area for accessibility. The last option does something a little bit radical, is a big word, but something Jonathan from our office brought up this idea of, rather than manipulating the ramp to get down to the basketball court, why don't we just raise the basketball court by, I think, 15, maybe 14 inches, so that that existing ramp that goes from the sidewalk to the basketball court could be ADA compliant. And I said, Jonathan, that's a genius idea. I don't know why we didn't think of that a long time ago. So there's really talk with our civil engineers, some of our geotech, there seems to be, at least right now, no concerns about raising the basketball court up another 12 to 14 inches. It would allow it to be a more accessible path, and we wouldn't have to essentially destroy or refabricate any of the bleachers or seats or steps that cascade down into the basketball court. Just the bottom step would essentially get covered up. And we also looked at providing the ramp to the tennis court along the townhouse. We'll obviously have to work to make sure that the foundations are not being burdened. We would probably build a sister wall along the townhouse to provide the accessibility off of the diagonal path rather than the southwest corner. And then this idea around the playground keeps the existing playground a little bit more intact as we know it today. So there's the older 5 to 12 equipment, and then the younger 0 to 5 on the bottom left. And the one difference is rather than the younger play equipment also being in the middle, we would introduce something a little bit more nature-based, a little bit more whimsical there at the corner, maybe a big mound of lawn with, again, this kind of rustic logs and rocks. Could be an opportunity for adults to sit on, just as the big lawn is an opportunity for people to gather. This small kind of, I'm not going to say a rock garden, but this small kind of lawn and rock grove and log grove could be an opportunity for people to sit as well. And you can see some of the images associated. So those are some three, I'll say, big ideas around the play space. I think it's mainly about how heavy-handed, how thematic do we want to be with the play space? How big do we want the play space to be? Do we want to push it all the way out to the edges, or do we like it being kind of confined the way it is now? The other thing I think we'd like to get some feedback on is this character of the play space. Last time we designed it, there's a real desire to keep everything muted, keep everything a little bit calm. And so just curious if the community has that same concept, or are we looking to do something a little bit more thematic like the images on the right, or something a little bit more rustic that uses natural materials, or something more contemporary, which is a little bit similar to what's out there now, or Frida Garcia, if you will, on the left. And so would love to hear community input about that tonight. And then lastly, this notion of storytelling came up, and I think we think it's a really great idea. Give some history, give some life, give some layers to the park. One of the conversations was this notion of the home for pregnant and unmarried women. Sounds strange, but the wall that is along West Newton was actually the garden wall from that original structure that you can see here on this image, the map. It's upside down from our maps. You can see Union Church, and then this kind of big block in the middle is actually Titus Sparrow Park today, or at least part of it, and you can see the New England home for pregnant and unmarried women. Interesting story. Second is obviously about Titus Sparrow, his legacy with local national tennis, and is there a way to tell more than just the plaque that's up on the wall? And then lastly, the notion of community empowerment regarding the bypass and the Orange Line itself, and the community's role in ensuring that the South End wouldn't be essentially the exit ramp that many feared it would be. And so how can those stories get told, right? There's a lot of great examples in Boston. The Haymarket, the found art on the upper left, this idea of perforated panels, I think that's at the Gardner Museum, or just off the Gardner Museum, used as a screen device, but also can tell a story with texture, pattern, even words. Christopher Columbus. Frida Garcia on the upper right used mosaic and a mosaic artist to translate the story that children told in some sketches into the park. Stenciled or precast or sandblasted poetry, imagery, maps, as you see on the bottom right. So all these are ideas that we can start to kick around, and would love to hear others' ideas around how we can start to tell some of these stories and which story is more important than the other. And then lastly, I think the one item I wanted to at least kind of share was this idea of increased porosity around the wall along West Newton. And so just some quick options we started to think about, right? Some more rectangular perforation, some more static kind of punched openings in the wall. The bottom left, the quatrefoil, which picks up on the character of the church and the fence. And so we can do some smaller punched openings, almost these peekaboo moments, if you will. Some larger slices on the upper right where they could be fully opened, or we could start to inlay panels, stained glass-esque, if you will, not really stained glass. Or do we, on the bottom right, do we essentially dissolve a third or a half of the wall and use that perforated metal to allow light and visibility in, but also tell a story or pattern or poetry or imagery around some of the narratives that we've talked about? So that was a little bit of a lot of information. And I think what we're really hoping to get, as I said, from the community is, are we on the right path? First of all, like this idea that we're keeping the northern half of the park relatively intact, but making it better. Is that a good solution? Second is the adult exercise equipment. It's going to take up some space. Is that something we're really interested in? What's its proximity to the play space? The play space itself, how loud, how vibrant, how expansive do we want it to be? Again, do we like it kind of contained in its area, or do we want it to really kind of seek the limits of that southern quadrant, if you will? And then I think lastly, the idea around the character of the play equipment, and any other ideas that you may have. So that's more or less where we're at. I think we're at a good spot, hopefully, and we've hopefully listened to a lot of the comments. And so we'd love to get some feedback from the small but mighty group we have tonight. And I think that's it. I don't know, Christine,
Do you
if
want me to read the chat off first, or do you want me to have people raise their hands?
Sure. Or sure, you can read the chat off. That'd be great.
All right. It started off with John Stewart asked, would like to come back to the topic of fencing and cameras.
I'm sorry, you broke up there, Christine. What was that?
He said he would, what John Stewart said, would like to come back to the topic of fencing and cameras.
Sure. I think we can talk about fencing and cameras. I think what we heard last week, I think we went around the horn, if you will, around fencing. I don't know about cameras. I think that's more of a Parks Department policy. So I'll let Annie answer that after I talk about fences. But there was some initial desire to have the park locked, have big fences. And I think most of the community came around to the fact that that wasn't very equitable. It wasn't very democratic. Whereas big fences make good neighbors in your backyard, they don't necessarily provide that same message in public open space. And so what I heard, and I'm happy to be corrected or supported or course corrected, what I heard was that visibility, safe lighting, maybe some security cameras was really the key to, and making sure the vegetation wasn't, kind of opportunities for unwanted behavior to occur. So that's where we landed, but happy to open that conversation up if necessary. And I don't know, John, if you want to, if Christine can unmute yourself, or you.
John's unmuted if
Okay.
you want to chime in.
Yeah, Rob, thank you. I do remember that topic about the fence. I think I wanted to come back to the cameras because we didn't really get a clear answer for that. Because, I think the topic that we brought up is, obviously in the whole city, everywhere, rising drug problem, a lot of crime, growing crime, and sort of, was there an option to have cameras like other parks do in the South End to just monitor the situation? And I know that the Parks Department was going to look into that and come back to us with a response. So I didn't want to go, at the beginning, you kind of went over it quickly. So I just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of that request.
Annie, do you want to talk about parks?
Yeah. We have a couple of obstacles with cameras, and primary is that we don't really have the staff to monitor what's showing up on the cameras and take action in a timely way. So they're of limited use to us. And as far as I know, we haven't been able to enlist help from the police department in doing this. And I know that that's not limited to Boston. Other municipalities have the same issue. So I think that a better bet is to have the park users present and visible so that that deters unwanted behaviors.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, I think, and I don't want to dwell on this topic too much, but other city parks in the South End have cameras, so somehow that problem's been overcome. The other thing is cameras also record, so that enables the police to do their investigations. And most of the crime, obviously, in drug usage is typically at night, though actually, during the off season, it can be more in the daytime even. During the full season, obviously the park is full and busy and there's less drug usage, but at nighttime, it definitely, during the off season, it does increase, and during nighttime. So kind of we just ask that we reconsider that request and just understand why this park is different from other ones in the South End.
Can you tell me which other parks have cameras?
Blackstone has them.
Okay.
And there's one other park which which I was walking by the other day. I will send an email later. I forget exactly which one it was.
That'd be
Great,
great.
thank you. Also, somebody had asked if there was a way to contribute comments later after the meeting if they can't stay for the whole time. And my contact information is on the flyer, which is posted in the park and is also on the project page at the park department's website. So, I would welcome any emails, phone calls. And just so you know, the best email address for me is Annie, ANNIE.Blair@boston.gov.
Christine, I can see the chat now. Sorry, I was.
No worries. Oliver
so,
has his hand up if
yep.
you want to let him.
Sure.
Oliver,
Hi.
you can, here you go.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I would agree with John that security has been a huge issue, particularly lately. I don't think that cutting trees is going to remedy this issue because drug users and other crimes have happened in plain sight lately. And there are other parks, as John pointed out, that have cameras. And that can have a deterrence effect too. Only if you put a sign saying that the area is under camera surveillance, people get deterred from committing crimes. I've seen many, many times people shooting themselves with drugs on the tennis court, on the basketball court, everywhere in the park, in daytime, in daylight, in full view of everybody, really. So this has become a real issue, and I don't see why this park would be treated any different than the other parks in the city. There are also some cameras. I frankly, I've gone from the station to on the Southwest Corridor Park, not that late, and I felt really scared. So something needs to be done about security. That's very important. And I don't think, again, that cutting trees to increase visibility is going to do anything because they're just doing it. Whatever crimes they're doing it in plain sight.
Yep. Yeah, and we can only, as much as egotistical as designers can be at times, right? We can only do what's within our power, and I can promise you that the end product at the end of this project, the park will seem more open, more visible. The lighting will be better. It'll be more active. The kind of broken window or light bulb syndrome of when things start to go into disrepair, they cascade into disrepair and misuse. That'll go away. I hear you on the cameras, and I think it's a valid point, and we'll continue to talk with the Parks Department, and I think you and John bring up a very good point, and Annie will do everything she can to see if there's a resolution in which cameras can be part of the answer. But we're not going to take the park away. We're not going to force people. We can't force people not to come into the park. And so I think I will say there will be a market improvement to the quality of the park when this is done.
Yeah. Now, the idea, just to be clear, is not to take the park away. Absolutely not. Just to resolve some of the issues that we've experienced. At the same
We're going to
time,
put a parking lot in, Oliver, and we're going to charge a lot of money, and we'll all. No, I joking. Your concerns are very valid, and it's something that this park and other urban parks struggle with a lot. And from a design point of view, we will make it a more visible and more porous park, but that doesn't change as you say, the activities that happen in broad daylight. So we will all work together to make this park the best we can.
One thing I should add as an aside is that given our current urban forestry plan and the desire to maintain as much tree canopy as possible, we are not removing trees for design purposes. We're only doing removals when the health of the tree makes it mandatory and the trees become a hazard.
Right, and if I misspoke, any clearing that I was referencing would be more of low branches or understory plantings that are creating visual barriers into the park. You know, a tree, other than its trunk, creates very little visual barrier into the park. So it'd be all the understory plantings, thinking about the kind of base understory plantings a little bit differently than what's out there now. So Stephen made the comment about the water fountains. Yes, our fault. There are 2 water fountains and both of them will be upgraded. Lorraine made a comment, there might be a consideration for some form of seating in the lawn that faces the stage. I think that's an interesting idea. That was the intent of the small serpentine rock wall that's around the pine tree that's in the lawn, but maybe there's some additional opportunities for providing a little bit more seating associated in the lawn, or maybe the lawn terraces in a manner that makes it a little bit more advantageous for seating and viewing of the stage. So I think it's a very interesting point.
Actually, on that point, one important consideration, I think, with regard to the lawn would be from the perspective of being used by little kids. That hill is very popular in the winter for sledding. So anything that could be done to preserve that aspect of it, and any additions, maybe, you know, if consideration could be given to, like, there are any big things placed at the bottom of the hill that kids could run into after sledding down the hill. I think that would be something important to consider, because that's a huge draw. It's one of the really great places in the neighborhood to go sledding on a snow day.
So this is,
Yeah.
Lorraine, I hear you, because I live just on the other side of the Southwest Corridor Park. I'm on Durham Street. And what I've noticed over the years with the wonderful concerts in the summertime, which one is going on right now, is it's a little awkward for older folks to have to sit on the lawn so to enjoy the concerts. So might there be an opportunity to combine both? Because the sledding is awesome, but those of us who are over 65, it's hard to get down on a blanket on the hill and enjoy the concerts, and or even just gather with other neighbors. So if there's some kind of, maybe it's uphill off to the side, but within visibility of the stage, it would be nice to have some. I saw a picture that showed a table with like 4 chairs that were attached to it, and
Yep.
just some options like that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I agreed. I think we have, I mean, my kids slid on that hill for the first, 6 years, 7 years of their life. And so, no, the sled hill is very precious, I think, to a lot of people in the community. And so we may even look at maybe making it a little bit higher there, just subtly higher at the top portion, so there's a little bit more run. And I think what Lorraine is referencing, is there an opportunity for, some small seating area off to the side, or again, is there just a slight folding of the lawn so that there is a little more gracious opportunity for people to sit in a more comfortable way? So I think those are really valid points, and we'll, as I like to say, run them through the flux capacitor and see if we can't find an answer that finds that sweet spot that we talked about in that diagram early on.
Rob, Stephen has his hand up.
Yeah, Stephen.
Oh, hi, thanks. We have several comments. One is, I think it's a great idea to raise that basketball court. Not only will it make the ramp more accessible, but it'll make the basketball court feel more part of the park and not kind of separate. So if you could do that, I think that's fantastic. That left triangle on these pictures that's next to Rutland Square, it's actually used quite a bit. And I think it's really nice having 2 big green spaces, that being one of them, because some kids are maybe playing soccer in one while other kids are playing Frisbee in the other, or whatever you have. So personally, I would prefer you not to put in extra, equipment there. Putting equipment on the right side triangle towards West Newton works better and I wouldn't interfere with that. It's okay to put, I like some of those ideas about putting some kind of visibility through that fence, just so long as the visibility isn't so large that those soccer balls start to keep on going out onto Rutland Square, because kids are really kicking around soccer balls a lot there.
Yeah.
I think having that large playground is great. I mean, that playground is used so much, and expanding it is great. My personal preference is for either your left or middle ones, not the really colorful one on the right. I forget which slide that was, but oh, and as for there are some benches that some people sit on for like the concerts that go along that path, and maybe it would be good to have some more or somehow expand those benches, because those work really well for the people who don't want to sit on the grass but still want to be able to view the concerts.
They do. Yes. Thank you, Stephen.
Michael has his hand up also. Michael, you can unmute yourself.
Hello, this is Karen, and Michael is sitting right by my side. I just want to make a couple of comments. I have had some experience in another city with community gardens, creating a children's garden, and we both had experience in preserving a passive use park in said city. And I think that preserving the green space that the park currently has is critical. As you mentioned earlier with your children's sledding in the winter, it's our experience to see the park used frequently and with great joy 4 seasons of the year. So I applaud you for really designing a plan that really preserves the lawn space, and agree with potential different adjustments to create more comfortable use. I've watched children have music groups under the shady trees with a guitarist who leads them in song and teaches them ABCs and numbers and all those wonderful things. The thing that we've experienced with green space is that once you give it up, you never get it back. So that's a really, in our experience, it's been a really critical kind of a red line, is that you just have to be aware of that. Once it's gone, you're likely not to get it back. I wonder about the adult fitness because I don't know how much of a demand you've gotten for that, because I feel like the children's space is incredibly precious. So precious that as much as I have had experience with community gardening, I don't feel a presence there is significant. And I can't speak for the gardeners who participate there, but I just wonder, because there's a great statement of community gardens along this along the corridor, that there's an opportunity there for those folks. And then let's see, lastly, the children's area, the experience I've enjoyed in a design for children is to keep it just really natural. Whether it's logs to climb on or crawl through, or a small water feature, just climbing ropes that lead up to a treetop. The natural and nature experience seems to really be the more long-lasting and less likely to become dated. And that's what I have to share.
Great. Thank you, both of you. Yeah, we did get feedback from community about the adult exercise equipment. When I was there, most of the people I knew were actually exercising on the playground equipment early in the morning, right? They're perfect pull-up bars and other, jump step kind of opportunities within a playground for adults as well as kids. And so, and I there's been a couple comments in the chat as well as your comments about the flexibility of those two lawn, especially the one on the left, the one on West Rutland, as a place for either the playground activities to expand a little bit or the lawn activities to expand a little bit. At least tonight we've been hearing, not to summarize this, but that the adult play equipment either shouldn't occur or it shouldn't occur, at least in that lawn quadrant. But maybe along West Newton, it might be a better opportunity if we move in that direction. So I think those are all very good points. The part about the community gardens, those West Newton, the ones along West Rutland Square, the ones closer to the stage, I think have always been well used. And I don't currently, no one is talking about removing those. It was simply the ones along the West Newton, the angled path, if you will, that get a lot less use and many times aren't filled over the course of the year. And so the discussion was to eliminate those.
No one has their hand up right now. Rob, you can go to the chat if you'd like.
Yeah, sure.
I-
Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, John Stewart, can I say something else?
Yeah, John.
Yeah, sorry.
yeah,
So
no,
just a
there's
few
only-
comments on the previous speakers, which I think were great. I think one of the topics that we talked about when we first had the meeting last month is like not to try to overdo it in the park. The balance was very important. And just no order of preference, but while I think adult exercise equipment is nice, I agree. I don't think there's a huge amount of demand, and taking away the green space or open space for that, I don't think is that important. We have a tennis court, we have a basketball court, we have plenty of exercise things around the city. I think it's just overdue for the park. I think subtlety, the woman before me phrased it much better around the playground equipment, natural, woodsy, whatever the themes are. Some of the things that you showed I thought were just not really in keeping with this type of park, though I like modernity. I thought that might just have been a little bit too much. In terms of the basketball court, I actually think the subtlety of having the basketball court a little bit lower helps keeping it from dominating the park. So I think I like that. Also, living as an abutter to the park, I think that might help the noise, reducing the noise impact. I do want to note that last time, I know we put some modern backboards up in the basketball court, which help reduce the noise. I assume we're going to use when we redo every kind of like all the best equipment.
Yes.
To help mitigate some of that noise. So I think that's very important. And I had one other point, but I forget it now. So, I also like keeping the green space as much as possible, kind of rather than eliminating some of it. I did want to comment on the wall. I do like the wall. Opening it up to bring a little bit light in, I think is good. Not too much, but I think just kind of creating a little bit of kind of some of the designs you showed there, I thought were quite nice.
Great. Yeah, and John, I think we're only talking about raising the basketball court 14 inches or plus or minus. I think it's about 3 feet down now, maybe 32 inches down. And so it'd still stay recessed. I agree. There's a, it's not an arena-like quality, but there's something about it that the slight depression, but I do wonder, bringing it up just a little bit, one will help with accessibility, but I think also raise it out of the kind of pit quality and maybe move it into the arena quality. And so
I've never
no, I don't
heard
think we're
that
gonna
as an issue before. Living here 20 plus years, but maybe it is an issue.
I don't know. I always wish it wasn't quite so deep.
Oh, really?
But
Okay.
maybe that's my own personal neighborhood view. But no, we're not bringing it up level with the lawn. It'll still be slightly recessed, but just enough so that we can make that ramp. Again, genius idea by Jonathan to make that ramp an ADA ramp so that we don't have to do a lot of jackhammering out of concrete or whatever. It's just simply redoing that ramp and raising the floor. And I think it'll help us if we're talking about using that as stormwater retention. We've been flirting around with using the area underneath the basketball court as permeable surfacing to allow some stormwater, rainwater storage. And so raising it up might help us in that regard to put more granular reservoir under there. So it may be a win-win in that regard.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just looking through the chat to, yeah, as John said, you know, we put new basketball backboards on 10 years ago, whenever we, time flies, and it really helped. And I think both new backboards, new rims, and I think even the new surfacing has some sound improvement qualities to it. So we'll definitely, as John said, use all the best practices around noise mitigation regarding the basketball courts.
So Rob, are they the perforated backboards from True Bounce?
No, I don't know. I don't remember if the perforated were around then. It was mainly, honestly, they were just old and had become, you know, not very rigid anymore. So everything was rattling around every time, but that was a long time ago. So I don't know if we'll use the True Bounce perforated. Obviously, Annie, you have a lot of experience with that. So we'll figure out, you know, the best solution regarding the backboards.
We use those in another park in another municipality where there were triple deckers right on top of the basketball court, and they made a really big difference. Plus, the sales rep is named Wayne Newton, so it's easy to remember him.
Yeah.
And well, so I'll say a lot of there's been some good input regarding the play space, the message, and I'm just going to repeat back, I think, what I've heard. And if I've heard differently, then please interject, but maybe definitely not overly thematic, overly kind of tall object, super modern, colorful, but maybe something a little bit more rustic. Again, a little bit more muted, and really putting some importance into the texture, quality, tactile experience around the play space, rather than, you know, bright, shiny objects. And if there's a way to introduce water, that's always tricky, but I think we can explore that as well. And then if there is adult play equipment, maybe located on the West Newton side, and allowing that western triangle, that western quad, to be what it is today, but an improved lawn with irrigation and better drainage.
I actually think if you go on the West Newton side, it's just more disruptive to the park, frankly. Just the kind of like the serenity of that section of the park, if you will, if we're trying to look at different zones. But anyway, one person's
On the
opinion.
West Newton side.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's near the bottom right, opposite the community gardens there, where it's at in option number 3, to me, that has some potential to be a place where it wouldn't disrupt kind of the grassy knoll, if you will, the pine knoll.
Oh, okay.
But we can, I think the jury, at least from the design team, is still out on the adult play space. And maybe at the last meeting, we'll, you know, have an option with and without it. And we can get some more feedback then.
Yeah, and one thing to note about adult exercise equipment is that it's much more low key than playground equipment. You know, it doesn't have to be terribly visible. it can be fairly subtle.
Yeah. And I forget, we did some research, what percentage of it is required to be accessible. So there can be, objects that are more tucked up in the hill. And as Annie says, a lot less visible, and some of the kind of more accessible or bigger objects may be down near the pathway. But let us advance that a little bit more. And I think at the third meeting, we'll come back with an option with and without the adult exercise equipment. And I apologize if I've been saying adult play equipment.
So this is,
So we've been thinking about our next meeting showing a preferred option or variations on a preferred option in September. And I wish I could be more clear about when that might happen in December. I have an unplanned for scheduling sort of dilemma, and that is that I was called for federal jury duty for the last 3 weeks in August. And I just won't know until I get into it what my availability is going to be like. So if you all can remain a little bit flexible, I would appreciate that so much.
so I'm sorry, Annie, it feels like, this is Lorraine. It feels like the meeting is about to wind down, but I submitted some chat questions that I haven't heard a response to.
Sure.
One is
Lorraine.
around, has there been any consideration for a small dog run on the park? I'm on the board of the Southwest Corridor Park Conservancy, so we're very focused on the state park that abuts of which Titus Sparrow abuts the park. And we just have, as does the current Titus Sparrow Park, has lots of dogs that run free, even though the signs say, please do not let your dog run. Was there any previous discussion about whether or not there might be a small spot on West Newton Street or around near the church that could potentially, a dog park a block away doesn't quite solve the problem. Sorry, Michael. Has there been any consideration with regard to having a small dog run near the park or near the church or somewhere that's not too obvious, but could accommodate the ever increasing number of dogs that we're all having to deal with in the city?
So this is not something that came up previously until today, at least as far as I'm aware. And I know that dog runs are few and far between. I know that because we have a dog. And on the other hand, this is not an enormous space. And I think we would have to look very carefully at what we would have to give up in order to accommodate that. And also who would maintain it and how they would maintain it.
Yeah, just something to think about. We have a very small dog park on the Southwest Corridor Park.
Right.
The Southwest Corridor Park is seriously overrun with dogs, many of which come from both the Back Bay and the South End.
Right.
And even in the Titus Sparrow Park, people really don't abide by the signage.
Right.
You let their dogs run, which really makes it very difficult for people to enjoy the grass because it's just not as safe as it used to be. So just a thought.
Yep.
Yeah, I think, Lorraine, it's a good comment. I mean, it's a comment we all get on every open space we work on in the city. And
absolutely.
As Andy said, right, it's unfortunately it's a and or it's not an and, it's an or conversation. Like, what program or what open space are we going to dedicate to the dog park? Because as you say, there's no duplicity in dog park spaces. Not that there is necessarily in playgrounds either, but I think that's something we'll have to continue to talk with. And frankly, I think your suggestion about a small one somehow closer to the church, the church should be a part of that conversation as well. So maybe the Friends group, we can have a dialogue with the church if there's any opportunities along the West Newton corner there.
And I mean, shame on all of the real estate agencies that say that this entire area is dog friendly, because it's a magnet. And
Right. Oh, yeah.
we all struggle with it. The one last comment I had, which I submitted in the chat, again, I apologize. There is a proposed soup kitchen that's going up in the Meth Union Church, and it will attract people who have a need for meals on a regular basis. Has that been discussed or considered with regard to how the space will be used around the church? Or has there been any discussion with the church in terms of the potential impact on a park redesign?
Well, I'm grateful to you for bringing it up because this is news to me. And so I think that this would be a great thing to discuss with the church, because it could absolutely have an impact on the park.
And I do believe that the construction of the commercial kitchen is well on its way, because it was funded by a CPA grant. So it got deferred as a result of COVID, but I believe the construction has started back up again. And so I think we don't fully appreciate what the final plan is in terms of, but my understanding is that a luncheon, a day food facility in has been closed, and the intention is to open up this kitchen long term to support those, and we just don't really appreciate what the impact's going to be. So I wanted to bring it up.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And we should, through the friends or Steve, and I think to the church, Martin, when he was around, Reverend Martin was so integrated into the earlier redesign 10 years ago. I think it'd be good to have a conversation with the church about what their hopes and dreams and fears are as well. So maybe Stephen, we can try to facilitate that conversation with them.
That was
point.
Yeah, this is Steve. We have a member of the church who's kind of representing the church on the Friends board. And so we can certainly discuss it with him. The church has been providing at least, I think so far, maybe just one day a month, food, but maybe not cooking for them, for people in need in the neighborhood. So far, it hasn't, as far as I'm aware, significantly impacted activities in the park. But and people have had concerns, and so far, the belief from the church is that it's really a very independent activity, that they would enter from a side door on West Newton Street, which is pretty close to Columbus Avenue, and the thought is it's not really going to impact the park itself, but we can certainly have more discussions with them about that, and so I'll bring it up with them.
Great.
Well, in looking out my office window, I can see the American Red Cross Food Bank that offers groceries 2 times a week. And the line of people on foot is really impressive. Not to mention the people who come by in cars. So, there's such a huge need right now. And I don't see that changing very much in the near future.
Agreed. Yes, Steve, just let us know, reach out and let us know how we can bring the church into the fold of the conversation. That would be great. Much appreciated.
Or will do.
Great. Happy to hear other comments. And it's, as Annie said, when her life works out a little bit more clear in August, we'll set up the final public meeting. Right now, sometime in September is the discussion.
So Annie, you the sympathy.
Well, I want to do my duty. I want to be a good citizen. And on the other hand, I pray that this doesn't turn out to be a very long-term commitment. And I've always, at some point with the Suffolk County Courthouse, they ask if you have family in law enforcement. And I've always been able to say yes, and that's gotten me off. But I understand that with the federal court system, that's not an automatic out. So we'll see what happens.
And I think, Annie said, by all means, reach out. Several people have reached out to Annie, and has then sent information on to us. So encourage you, if there's something you forgot, or if you hear something from a friend or neighbor, please don't hesitate to send an email. We're very much an open door policy. So would love to hear anything, even after the fact of tonight's meeting. Would be greatly appreciated.
And Lorraine, I had to laugh when you were talking about people of certain abilities not being that enthusiastic about sitting on the lawn. I don't have a problem with all sitting down on the lawn. It's getting up that's so problematic.
So maybe there could be stair rails every.
Well, one thing
Ejector.
one thing we have been
Low
doing,
velocity ejector seats.
we've been including center handrails on a lot of our benches, partly because that does make it easier to get up off a bench, and it also discourages people from sleeping on the bench.
And that's the issue we deal with on the corridor park. And
Yeah.
had to come up with a variety of ways to make it more difficult. Well, I don't mean to say it that way, but
Discouraged.
it's a challenge.
Yeah.
Annie, can I just reconfirm your email address? ANNIE.BLAIRE@boston.gov.
There's no E at the end of Blair.
Okay.
It's like Tony Blair.
Thank you.
Are you related?
No.
Probably a good thing.
Nope. Well, thank you all so much for your time. I really appreciate your participation and your insights. And it's given us a lot to think about and work with. So this has been terrific. Thank you so much. And thanks to
Thank
Rob.
you, everyone.
Yep, Rob and
you.
Jonathan and Christine for moving this forward.
Great. Thank you, everyone.